We were in this chapter, in this paragraph, beginning with the mother as the Mahashakti of this triple world of the ignorance, stands in an intermediate plane, and down that paragraph we had taken up one very important concept, that is, in the process of evolution, Sri Aurobindo writes, there is a flowering of life and soul and mind into the infinity of the spirit. So in our last class we saw how there is the beginning of the soul and even the psychic presence before the descent of the mind itself. And we had said that we will take up one more important philosophic concept here before we proceed with the next line. The concept that I'll take up in brief today is this. The supramental light, the truth life, the truth creation, which has to be brought down here, and this mounting and descending hierarchy of planes of consciousness, that like a double ladder laps into the nations of matter and climb back again through the flowering of life and soul and mind into the infinity of the spirit. I know most of you have already done sufficient reading regarding the concepts of involution and evolution, but for the sake of recapitulation maybe, I will just draw this diagram here to make things easier as usual, and we will see what is this meaning of the double ladder that lapses into the nations of matter and climbs back again. You see, we have drawn this chart many a time, but once again, so there is this involution, and we have seen the different steps: supermind, overmind, middle ranges, mind, then there's a vital or the life, then matter, and inconscience. So these are considered as rungs of a ladder. So that's why this is the descending ladder, which is the process of involution. And the same thing we have seen happens on the reverse, when from the inconscient there's matter, there's life and mind, intermediate ranges, overmind and the supermind. So this is the process, the returning, the going back, which we call as the ascending ladder. So that's why the name given the double ladder, the descending ladder and the ascending ladder. And he notes here, she, the mother, stands in an intermediate plane between the supramental life, the truth creation, which has to be brought down here, and this mounting and descending hierarchy of planes of consciousness. So these are the planes of consciousness. But before that, there are the different worlds, the truth worlds, what Sri Aurobindo calls the supramental worlds, intermediate plane between the supramental light, etc. supramental light, truth, etc. Now here we are interested not in the philosophy but seeing what Sri Aurobindo mentions here. She stands in an intermediate plane between these worlds, what we discussed last time as Sadghana Loka, Chidghana Loka and Anantagana Loka. So between these worlds and this process of involution and evolution, which is the level of manifestation. So the mother stands here. She is the bridge between the upper hemisphere and the lower hemisphere. So that is the position where it says she stands between the upper hemisphere, the worlds of supramental light, etc., and the lower hemisphere, which is the world of involution and evolution. So she is the golden bridge, the wonderful fire, what we see in Savitri. So like a double ladder, collapse into the nations of matter and climb back again through the flowering of etc. what we have seen last time, life, mind. But what we saw was between life and mind there is the birth of the psychic presence. The mother, last time if you remember, we read a section from her writing where she describes the psychic presence in the animals as instinct. But the psychic presence is most prominent before man in the flowers. That's why they can give a kind of a specific personality, a character. To each flower has a character, so she connects with that and she says what is the nature of this flower, because the psychic presence is so very prominent there. So we have seen that. Now there's one idea that I wanted to add here that's a bit philosophic but which is required. You see, Sri Aurobindo adds one note, one important idea, saying that actually this is the process of evolution, widening, heightening and integrating. So evolution does not take place automatically, because you see normally we have said from matter to life to mind, etc. But there is a specific process, a rhythm, if I can say. So first of all there is the question of widening. So the base of, say, we start from matter, the base of matter has to be widened. Say for example, if I take the example of life, that will be easier to explain. Now when did really life come upon earth or come on matter or come out of matter? Was there any kind of a specific moment? We say when matter was ready or when matter was mature. But what do we mean by this matter was ready to give birth to life? There's one or two conditions. Sri Aurobindo would say there has to be enough of widening. We can understand that if we can apply that to our own human beings and the supposed next race, the new race or the supramental race. When will the supramental race come? When there is the sufficient widening of the mental consciousness in the human beings. You see, human beings are supposedly by definition having a mind. But is this mind activated on a higher level across humanity? Not so. So we have been there since the last thousands of years. But why is it that Sri Aurobindo considers the time is right now? That's because of the widening. So we have reached, not that the whole humanity, but a sufficient level of widening of mental consciousness, out of whom there is a section of humanity which is ready for heightening, which is ready to take the next step. It goes to the higher level. But that is, the base is, if you can imagine the pyramid, we have to have a very widening or a wide base. It is only after this process that there is the process of heightening. There is a leap into the next level. But Sri Aurobindo again mentions something wonderful here. It may be that the whole of mental consciousness is pretty wide in humanity, and yet, when does the supermind come in? Or when does mind come into life? Or when does life come into mind or into matter? You see, okay, let us say we have fulfilled this condition. But what is that point? Can matter or life or mind or the animal say, I am ready for the next step? That question of I am ready comes only, we have talked about the psychic presence. When the psychic presence in the animal, when the soul in matter, when the psychic being in man, that aspires. So the one who to draw down, to pull down the next level is not our mental consciousness saying we are ready for the supermind, we have built a beautiful Auroville, we have got dozens of Auroville across the world and we are ready. No. Even if there is a widening of a consciousness of human unity around, across the globe, still Sri Aurobindo would say, it is always the psychic aspiration of the species which calls down the next level of consciousness. That is why now we understand why the mother speaks of the psychic presence in each level of evolution. Because that is the life, the living consciousness which brings down, which pulls down the next level. So there is this heightening by the process of the aspiration of the psychic in man, in life, in the animal, in matter. And that again relates to our own life. Why Sri Aurobindo and the mother have told umpteen number of times, the countless times, the importance of the psychic being. It is not that we have to build an Auroville which is magnificent on the material level, on the research level, all that is one side. But the emphasis is on the psychic aspiration. Because it is only the psychic aspiration which can pull down the new consciousness. What we call the psychic aspiration, which can call, pull down, bring down the next race, that becomes a little, if I can say, hastened, becomes faster by the descent of the avatar, who comes into humanity and gives this fillip to humanity to aspire for the next stage. Otherwise, human beings would be pretty satisfied with their material needs, and the living aspiration is always there, the psychic presence is there. But as I said, to hasten the movement of this aspiration, to give it a kind of a little push, that's the requirement of the avatar, who comes and sort of, sparkles this question of the psychic aspiration. So if Mother and Sri Aurobindo have been telling us umpteen times, aspire for the psychic realization, is not only just for our own individual heightening of consciousness. It is there for the entire humanity to go to the next level. We need the psychic aspiration. So that's why Auroville is a very, very beautifully balanced thing, the outer and the inner. So we are not building Auroville outside. Auroville has to be built within. That building within is that Matir Mandir, the golden dome within, the psychic being. So we have to understand that this is the process of heightening. And once the next stage comes, say what we said was the life or the mind, whichever level comes, it integrates. Integrates means it takes the lower levels and transforms them for its own use, for its own purpose. Again, to give you the example of we can understand better, says the supermind comes in. So the supermind integrates mind and life and matter. It brings it into your own touch and consciousness. Because Sri Aurobindo would say, this is what has happened in the past also. When mind came, matter was transformed. You see, there is the stone and the physical body of the human person. But both are matter. But the matter in our human body becomes so very sensitive and responsive. So similarly, life has changed. As Sri Aurobindo would say, life has been mentalized. So everywhere there is this impression of the higher on the lower. And the lower is pulled up, taken up into its own level. So if that is the principle, then again we see the question of the supermind. When supermind comes, it will not be just, a property or possession of the few. It will pull up this whole mind principle itself. It will impact the life principle itself. So there is a kind of an automatic transformation of the mind and the life and matter. But yes, it is not an automatic transformation of the whole of humanity. Sri Aurobindo is absolutely clear that the humanity as a whole will not be transformed into the supermind. But definitely there will be the impact. Like the mind has an impact on life, life has an impact on matter. There is an impact of the supermind on the mind principle. So this is the process of evolution. Widening, heightening and integration. And maybe to come back, you see, even we as Aurobindonians are maybe going through the process of the mental widening. Because unless and until the mind and the heart widen themselves, it will be difficult to use the word making ourselves universal, but anything short of that widening, making our mind supple, that is what is required. Because for the psychic to aspire for the next level, Sri Aurobindo would say, widen your mind. Because that widening is a necessary condition for the aspiration of the psychic being. So we see here, this is the principle of the double ladder and the 3 stages that I have described here. So I take go back to the text, and we have now taken up both the philosophic aspects of the double ladder and the process of evolution of the soul, etc. Now I take up the next sentence. Determining all that shall be in this universe and in the terrestrial evolution by what she sees and feels and pours from her. She stands there above the gods, and all her powers and personalities are put out in front of her for their action. And she sends down emanations of them into these lower worlds to intervene, to govern, to battle and conquer, to lead and turn their cycles, to direct the total and individual lines of their forces. You see, here there is again a new idea, that of the emanations. So the mother standing in between the lower hemisphere and the higher hemisphere, she determines all that shall be in this universe. That's the aspect that we will see later of Maheshwari. She creates the blueprint, as if, of the entire universe. She determines, everything is determined. So, all that shall be in this universe and in the terrestrial evolution, what we have seen, the process of evolution, by what she sees and feels and pours from her. Everything is, pouring from her. But here there's one important thing. She stands there above the gods, and all her powers are put out in front of her for the action. So this is what we had discussed long back, if you remember, the descent of the levels of consciousness. In Indian philosophy and in Sri Aurobindo, especially in Sri Aurobindo, not so much in Indian philosophy, there is this hierarchy of the divine personalities. It is not like other religions, God created the world. Between God and the world, there are other powers, what are called the emanations. So it's a kind of a giving the rights and authorities to different levels of consciousness. It is not that the Supreme Aditi or Brahman or Sachidananda, whatever we call, it's not that they have created directly. There is always this question of put in front of her, delegation. And we have seen this many times in the stories of the four emanations, how the Supreme Mother delegates her powers. And these four powers, once they get the delegation, they will go about the creation. So always there's a question of these powers and personalities are put in front of her for the action. Now here Sri Aurobindo has a note about the emanations. This is on page 63 of this volume on the Mother. What are these emanations? In fact, there's one definition by the Mother. Of course, that is a vibhuti, the word comes later, but I'll read it out now. There is a difference between vibhuti and emanations, but let me read out the emanation not to confuse you, first from Sri Aurobindo, then from the Mother. Emanations correspond to your description of the matrikas of whom you speak in your letters. An emanation of the Mother is something of her consciousness and power put forth from her, which, so long as it is in play, is held in close connection with her. And when its play is no longer required, is withdrawn back into its source, but can always be put out and brought into play once more. So these are if you remember, the four emanations of consciousness and love and life and light. She had said in a story form, but this is the truth Sri Aurobindo would also later describe, the four emanations of the Mother that are put out are this emanation of consciousness, love, life, and light. But what has happened here? So they have been put into play, but also the detaining thread of connection can be severed or loosened, and that which came forth as an emanation can proceed on its way as an independent divine being with its own play in the world. We have seen this also, the Mother explains, that how these four emanations, at a point, they severed or loosened their connection with Aditi. So they went out saying that we are independent. We do not have to depend upon the source, the Aditi. So they have started their own creation. They have ended up in creating. The consciousness created the world of inconscience. Love brought in suffering. Life brought in death. And light ended up as falsehood. So this is what happened, as we said, that these four falsehoods are the first creations of this universe. It is after that we see this involutionary process of overmind and gods and all that. So that's why Sri Aurobindo has very clearly mentioned here that the detaining thread of connection can be severed or loosened, and that which came forth as an emanation can proceed on its way. All the gods can put forth such emanations from their being, identical with them in essence of consciousness and power, though not commensurate. In a certain sense, the universe itself can be said to be an emanation from the Supreme. In the consciousness of the sadhak, an emanation of the Mother will ordinarily wear the appearance, form, and characteristics with which he is familiar. You see, this is interesting because we have heard of many people who have had dreams in which they have seen Sri Aurobindo or the Mother. But very interestingly, the Mother is attired like Virgin Mary or in some other external body, because as she says here, the Mother will ordinarily wear the appearance, form, and characteristics with which he is familiar. And in the Gita also it is mentioned very clearly that the divine comes to you in the form to which you are used to seeing him or imagining him or have read about him, descriptions about him. So if you are a bhakta of Sri Krishna or Christ or Buddha, the divine, when he comes in the form of the same deity whom you worship. Because if that form is close to your heart, he comes in the same form. So that is the sadhak who sees an emanation of the Mother. And then Sri Aurobindo proceeds, in a sense the four powers of the Mother may be called, because of their origin, her emanations, just as the gods may be called emanations of the divine. But they have a more permanent and fixed character. They are at once independent beings allowed their play by the Adya Shakti, and yet portions of the Mother, the Mahashakti. And she can always either manifest through them as separate beings or draw them together as her own various personalities and hold them in herself, sometimes kept back, sometimes at play, according to her will. In the supramental plane, they are always in her and do not act independently, but as intimate portions of the supramental Mahashakti, and in close union and harmony with each other. Well, here we will take up this para more when we start the four aspects of the Mother, because he is speaking of the four personalities. The four personalities, what we know as Mahashakti, Mahalakshmi, etc., that on the supramental level, they are intimate portions of the supramental Mahashakti. But what is interesting, if you have noted here, is this, and yet she can always either manifest through them, through these four aspects, as separate beings, or draw them together as her own various personalities and hold them in herself. This is the present incarnation of the Mother. You see, all along she has manifested herself through her different personalities. And if you really study the human history, we see it very clearly that at each phase of human evolution, one of these personalities of the Mother has dominated the Earth's evolution. First, there was the Maheshwari, where we see in all civilizations the birth of great philosophies, great spiritual wisdom, great religions. There has been always a birth of the spiritual first, what we say, a divine vision. So every civilization has that as the base. So all across the earth, different timings, this has been the basis, where Maheshwari was the dominant aspect. Then came the Mahakali. And when Mahakali dominates this over earth's evolution, we see the formation of the kings and the kingdoms and the battles, and the whole earth has its own stories of kings and kingdoms and battles. That is the Shakti aspect. So, up until recently, we had this phase. And then the third aspect we see Mahalakshmi, the harmony and wealth, which began with this industrial revolution. So, where there has been the equal distribution of wealth, that is the Mahalakshmi aspect. So, this also humanity has seen and is seeing. What we say partly the gross or the great materialism is partly the movement of Mahalakshmi, where wealth is distributed, is equalized, is spread out all over the world. It is not that one nation is keeping it, there is an equal sharing. Of course, there are politics and there are disbalances, but I am saying on a general principle. Then the last aspect, Mahasaraswati, perfection of work. That's the aspect of technology that has come into humanity now. And also the great philosophy of the communists, where the labor, the worker, he has come up. So because Saraswati is that age of work, perfection in work, and where workers become more dominant, predominant and important than the Brahmin and the Kshatriya. That's the fourth phase. So in each level there is of growth and evolution, one aspect of the Divine Mother was predominant.